Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Takhlai, and today I'm joined by Ezekiel Gebissa. As most of you will know, he is a professor at Kettering University in Michigan, in the US. And more importantly for us, he's a commentator on Ethiopian politics, and he's a writer. He has written a lot about Ethiopia, about why previous regimes have failed, about why the country is in the state it is in, and a lot of other issues. And he has joined me today to discuss some of his points of view on Ethiopia. Thank you very much for making the time, Ezekiel.
Thanks for inviting me.
It's my pleasure. This is something that we have been trying to make happen for a long time, but for one reason or another, it hasn't happened. So I'm really grateful that you have managed to make it today. And maybe we could start with an essay that you have written sometime a couple of years ago, Ezekiel. I was reading it about why it is that previous attempts at state building in Ethiopia have failed, from the Haile Selassie regime to the Derg regime to the EPRDF to the current regime. You have explained what it is that they were trying to do and why they have failed. And maybe it could be good for our listeners if you could give us a brief summary of the point that you made in that paper, in that essay.
Sure. I think it was published last year. It's not that old. It was I was asked to write a guest editorial for the Edison Standard, and at the time there was a discussion in the midst of not in the midst of, just after the war in the north, the Tigray war ended with the Pretoria Accords. And that war is basically about self-rule, the demand for self-governance, and the new political order that the Prosperity Party was trying to build in Ethiopia. So we've been through this, that the political problem that usually leads to conflict in Ethiopia, at the root of the conflict is always the refusal of the center to share power and the other attendants that comes with holding the central power in Ethiopia. People talk about, we don't need ethnic politics. We need only politics that is based on ideas, as if we don't have any history of who holds power in Ethiopia and what the character of the Ethiopian polity is altogether. What I'm trying to communicate in that article is that the country, Ethiopia, has always had political problems, and that arises from the willingness or the unwillingness to share power. And if you want to share power, how do you share power? Political parties are not strong in Ethiopia. They don't have a history of ideological parties in Ethiopia. Power was contested in Ethiopia because Ethiopia is a multinational state. Tigray, Oromo, Amhara, and others, but primarily these three were contending for power. Look, there are no political parties based on ideology. The foundation of politics in Ethiopia is basically the nations and the nationalities. That is how it is organized. The political blocks, political interests, and power itself was built on the nations and nationalities. That is the idea of ethnocracy in that article. It says Ethiopia has always been, or Ethiopian politics has always been an ethnocracy since the Gondarian period. That one group, whether that is based in Tigray or Amhara or in the Oromo region, they hold power and then use that power on behalf of an ethnic group. Look, it surprises me that people are now discussing in Ethiopia that power or the exercise of power has not been connected with ethnicity. It has always been connected with ethnicity. It's a fact of life in Ethiopia, in the absence of ideologically centered parties, interest was defined by the ethnic group. Even in economics, where buying and selling is based on interest, and you always want to profit, it's the same thing in Ethiopian political economy. Political interests are organized along ethnic lines, not ideological lines or purely economic interests. Take the question of land. Why has it been impossible for the imperial government not to reform land reform and obviates the problems that we have encountered since the fall of the imperial regime? It's because the issue of land is not just about class. And of course, there was a landholding class in Ethiopia, but that landholding class, because of historical circumstances, was drawn from one ethnic group or others who collaborated with them. Who collaborated with the ethnic group actually became assimilated into that ethnic group. So the interest of an ethnic group was protected by the state. So there was ethnocracy. Ethnocracy is the reality of life in Ethiopia. It is a fact of political life in Ethiopia. So the idea that there was no ethnicity connected with power and the benefits of power, of wielding power, that there was no official culture in Ethiopia that is drawn from the one ethnic group, particularly the Amhara ethnic group, doesn't sit well in Oromia or in Somali region or in Tigray, for that matter, where people say that it is closer to the Amhara. So what surprises me is when people say that there was no Amharic-speaking ruling class that dominated Ethiopian politics since the founding of it, is simply to deny Ethiopian history and how power was shared. So I wrote for one reason, to express that idea that in Ethiopia, political power and economic interests have been fused, and the problem that arises and the conflict that were fought were along ethnic lines. So except we recognize the history, we must recognize the history that Ethiopian government has always been an ethnocratic state. The other thing is, because it has been ethnocratic, there has always been an ethno-national opposition to the power, to the holders or the wielders of power. What that means is that because, and I'm careful about this, it's Amharic speaking. I'm going to emphasize that, Amharic speaking ruling class. That doesn't mean the entire Amhara population was the ruling class. What we mean is Amharic speaking. It means that they could be drawn from anywhere as well, but once they are in power, they are defined as, in terms of Amhara culture and Amhara supremacy in language, in culture, in presentation of Ethiopia to the outside world. It's the Amharic speaking ruling class that portray Ethiopia as basically Amhara, because that was the policy of assimilating everybody into the Amhara character, the Amhara essence, the Amhara ethos. So there was a reaction to it. There was a reaction to this ethnocratic state, and the reaction is based on ethno-national character. Because power was ethnocratic always, the opposition was also ethnic-based. That's what ethno-nationalism is. And I write about that at length, saying that, look, why did we have the TPLF, the Afar Liberation Front, Oromo Liberation Front, Ogaden Liberation Front, Sidama Liberation Front, Gambela Liberation Front? What is that we didn't have? Why are they always being along ethnic lines? It's because Ethiopian power was shared only by one ethnic group. The opposition tells you about the ethnocratic character of the Ethiopian state. So that's basically what I was writing. And finally, in 2018, writing about the Oromo and others, they have become pragmatic. Look, the TPLF, for instance, was an ethnic-based party. But when they governed, say what you may, when they governed like an Ethiopian state. More pragmatic that Meles Zenawi had to come up with a developmental state to grow the economy, invite others like the OPDO or the TPLF and the Amhara. All of these were ethnic-centered parties that governed Ethiopia together. That is pragmatism. Understanding that Ethiopia as a nation is a multinational country, and the politics has always been ethnic-based. If you recognize that, you don't govern as one ethnic group, you govern as a federation. So that's what the EPRDF did. They at least recognized the character of Ethiopian as a country, and the politics as ethnocratic. So the way to govern, they said, should be to share power as a federation. But of course, they made some mistakes, but it was a mistake that they could make, which could be corrected politically, that is. But when this government came to power, it started to wage war against ethno-nations. The prime minister made a speech in which he actually said, these ethnocratic parties are the scourge of Ethiopian politics. And he wanted to eradicate them. And this is a costly war against pragmatism. The TPLF ethnic-based, but they were pragmatic. They were following what works for Ethiopia. Even the OLF had changed its program and accepted the federal arrangement as holding the country together and as a solution to the age-old problem arising from ethnocratic power wielding. Ogaden Liberation Front, they all accepted that. This is a state where ethno-nationalism had become pragmatic, but the Ethiopian state is waging war against them, and it's going to be very costly in terms of human life, property, the economy, and the future of Ethiopia. So that's basically what I was writing in that piece.
Well, I think you raise a lot of the points that I would want us to discuss in this session, Ezekiel. The first point you make is the centrality of ethnicity, and you say that it's because of that there is a proliferation of ethnic-based parties, from the TPLF to the OLF to the other parties. And I think there are two sort of viewpoints on this. Those people who say that this is a problem that was brought to reality in the 1960s, and I think when you speak, you have them in mind. Of course, they are wrong. Like you say, ethnicity has always been part and parcel of Ethiopia. It has always been a reality, a fact of life in Ethiopia. But there are other people who make the following argument in good faith. They say that it might be a fact of life, but it is something that we should seek to transcend. They say that as long as politics is based on ethnicity, there will always be problems in the country. And for that reason, it is a problem that we should try to solve, not accept. What do you say about that, if I'm clear?
Yeah, this is a debate that people ought to have to come to a consensus. There are people who believe that because ethnicity is a reality in Ethiopia, we shouldn't politicize ethnicity. They do say that, and I understand that. It's not easy to make cultural boundaries and political boundaries the same. I completely understand, but I don't think it is right. You can't do that through political engineering or social engineering. You begin by accepting the reality as it is. As a goal, that's a good idea. As a goal, non-ethnic or group-based politics is probably conceptually a good idea. But the reality of Ethiopia cannot accommodate that. The reality of Ethiopia, the current reality of Ethiopia, is what we need to take into account. Just because you didn't like ethnic politics, and you think that ideology-based politics is better, because you wished it, it's not going to happen. It's not going to have it. You accept from your own reality. And the Ethiopian reality is that that ethnicity is a factor that defines political interests, that defines economic interests. Recognition of the problem is the first step towards seeking a solution. So recognizing that Ethiopia is a country of nations, as in the 90s, Dr. Fasil Nahom wrote a book on the Ethiopian constitution and the making of the Ethiopian constitution, in which he argued that this is a constitution for a nation of nations. If Ethiopia is a nation of nations, the constitution that works for Ethiopia is a constitution that works for the nation of nations. You cannot simply take the American Constitution, which is a good constitution, and superimpose it on Ethiopian politics and Ethiopian reality. The idea of transplantation, the idea of an ideal politics, the pursuit of the ideal, it makes you feel good, but it doesn't solve any problem. In Ethiopia, then, you recognize the problem and then accommodate the problem, and in time, you could get to the ideal in time, not today, maybe in 20 years, through process, through understanding, through resolving problems, through education, you can get to the ideal politics that people wish. But like I was saying, there is no tradition of ideology-based politics in Ethiopia. There is none. On what are you going to build? Ideas-based politics. Yes, of course, group-based politics, whether that is ethnic or gender or that, it's not ideal. It's not ideal. Doesn't work well with the idea of democracy. Okay? But you can't build it on nothing. Ethiopia has a political culture, and that political culture is defined in terms of ethnicity, even today. So you start with the reality and work for what works. Go for what works, not what you wish to be. As Isaiah Berlin said, the pursuit of the ideal is a good thing. But in nature or in life or in human history, good things don't come together. They don't live together. They don't coexist. You cannot have security and liberty at the same time. You have to choose. The great goods, you have to choose. And the choice at this point in time from the perspective of pragmatic politics is to recognize ethnicity, to recognize that history in the past that did some wrong is based on ethnic politics. And what can we do to get out of it? And in time, build towards an ideal. By the way, this is not a destination. It's not a destination. Anytime that reform is needed, you reform in light of the prevailing realities. And the prevailing reality today in Ethiopia is that the issue of ethnicity, nations, and nationalities must be addressed head on. If there are problems with the federal arrangement that was in place for a long time, you can improve it. But by tossing it around, by creating some fictitious excuses like, I wasn't represented then, is not going to solve the problem. And we have seen the result, brother. We've already seen the result. The result of trying to suppress regional politics based on ethnicity, the result has been the killing of 1 million people, massacres, the worst kind of war in Ethiopian politics, unparalleled destruction, and even the future of Ethiopia. So we have seen it. We have seen it. And if we are still insisting that it doesn't exist, then we're not ready for a solution. So the point is that the idea of pragmatism is reality is a reality as a way of intruding into our face. And then we have to recognize and try to work with what is available, not what we wish to have, but with the realities of the country.
The pursuit of the ideal is an interesting term, Ezekiel, and I completely agree with you that most disasters in human history have been caused by people who have a vision of Ethiopia, a vision of the ideal, and I understand why you would say that. But to play the devil's advocate for a moment, the devil is here being the people who say that ethnicity is something that we should eradicate. You mentioned the American Constitution, for instance, and these people might say that the Americans when they wrote the founding fathers, when they wrote the Constitution, they could have chosen the path of ethnicity, where ethnicity, because they had Italian Americans, they had Irish Americans, they had Americans of various descriptions, and if they had the kind of ethnic consciousness that exists in Ethiopia, they could have framed the constitution in the way that the Ethiopian constitution is framed, but they didn't choose that path because they had, relatively speaking, an idealistic vision, which was ethnic transcendent in a way. And these people might say we could do something similar in Ethiopia. Um, how do you respond to that, if that is something that makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, number one, the United States was an experiment. When they started, it was an experiment. It was an experiment based on an idea, that is the Enlightenment idea, the Enlightenment project. It's an experiment that succeeded, but succeeded not because of the smooth sail that the American experiment had. We had a civil war. A civil war. So the notion that we should follow the American path, a well-trodden path, is not an ideal one, because the reality of the United States in 1776 and Ethiopia in 1991 are two different histories. Let me say one more thing, that Americans did not choose the ethnic-based. If what we mean ethnicity is the settlers here in the United States from Europe, it's the Anglophone experiment. It was Anglophone. That they didn't pay attention. They didn't pay attention to ethnicity is not true. They did. They still pay attention to ethnicity. But they didn't build their federation based on ethnicity, because they didn't have contentious ethnic-based factions at the time. Look, were there ethnically different inhabitants of the what became the United States at that time? Weren't there the indigenous peoples of the United States? What did happen to them? They were eradicated. The Trail of Tears. They were eradicated. They were not represented. So the Anglophone idea was imposed on all people. They was not really representative on the basis of. So that is not a path that we can compare with Ethiopia. Different times, but it's an experiment that succeeded, not because it was just the ideal thing to do at the time, but because they thought that the so-called founding fathers thought that they could start a new country that was different from the country that they were seceding from. And by the way, the American Revolution was a revolution of conservatives. That is not the kind of revolution that we were looking for in Ethiopia. So the comparison with America it doesn't work. It's not an analogy that would work for Ethiopia. But even then, it was not ideal, is what I'm saying. It is in time that the American experiment actually succeeded, not even 40, 50 years, and it didn't go away, by the way. It didn't go away even now. The idea of identity politics hasn't gone away in America. It's based on race. And if you look closely into it, it's based on ethnicity as well. But it didn't go away. It just didn't go away. So it's not a good example. What we do in Ethiopia must be based on Ethiopian history, on Ethiopian reality, and we need our own. Maybe I would probably agree to some extent where people say we have our own history. We should look inward into our own history. We should not look at federations and all that. I said, granted, let's take that history of Ethiopia under Johannes. Ethiopia was a federation. The ruling they were there were Ethiopians who were under the sovereign, but they were also almost self-governing units. Even under Menelik, there were federations. Even under Menelik, I come from Wallagga. Wallagga had two monarchies. In Wallagga, there were two monarchies that were ruled by the indigenous people, the Oromo people in Wallagga. The same I could say about Harar and some parts of Ilubabur and Jimma itself. They were self-governing units. The problem, the political problem that we face today was, yes, created because of the violence that brought the country together, but the way even Menelik governed was allowing some self-governance to go on as long as they paid tributes and loyalty to the emperor. The problem is rooted in the centralization of power, the unitarization of the form of the state, and the assimilationist policy that Haile Selassie instituted. There is history there on how to govern a multinational state. We could have learned from the Ottomans, but we could have learned from our own history as well. The problem in Ethiopia was created, the genesis could go back to Menelik, but it is after Menelik that the centralization scheme of Haile Selassie and the unitarization of the state through two constitutions, the assimilation, which resulted in the alienation of some of the people who did not speak Amharic, the marginalization of them, the de-enfranchise of them in Ethiopia. Those are the political problems. Those are the political problems that need to be cured. You cannot cure a problem of centralization and concentration of power by concentrating more power at the center. You cannot cure the problem of unitary state by making the state itself more and more unitary, which is what is going on right now. You cannot create cultural autonomy for people and integrate them as they are into the polity by destroying their culture and by bedeviling a certain group of people who rose in the 1960s. That's not the way to cure it. You cure it by looking at the ailment. And the ailment, as I said, is a centralization of power, the unitarization of the state, the alienation, marginalization in politics, and the assimilation of the nations of the country. Those need to be addressed before you move on to anything else. And I think that's what would be my answer to them.
What I mean, one of the things you say is that the attempt to draw any parallel between the Ethiopian constitution and the American one is not instructive, and I completely agree with you, and I understand why you would say that. But as you will have noticed, it's something that has a lot of currency in Ethiopian discourse. Many people say that only if Ethiopia could imitate the US, we would be in a much more better position. That is something that a lot of people say. I think partly it's because of the sort of cultural hegemony of the US. Many people believe that other countries should simply sort of copy the US wholesale. There's an element of that, but there is also a belief that the American Constitution is the perfect example of how to write a constitution, and that is exactly what Ethiopia should do. Sort of give or take the minor differences. So that's why I sort of probed you on that. I pushed you on that. But you say that we should look inwards to Ethiopia, and the solutions we seek should be solutions that are tailored to the Ethiopian problems. And I think that's a good point. So if you could fast forward to 2018 from the point of view of history. In the essay, you say that the EPRDF had, by and large, the right ideas in terms of trying to institute federalism. You say that on paper, that wasn't a bad system. You also say in the essay that the developmental state, by way of political economy, wasn't bad either, at least when measured by result, it was delivering. But you also said that there was a contradiction at the heart of everything, and it was a contradiction that apparently the APRDF didn't quite know. What was the contradiction, first? And second, why is it that they didn't see it? Because, you could say a lot of things about people like Melles, but they were not people who didn't understand how things work. And you would expect Melles would at least know that there was a contradiction. But why is it that it eluded them, the contradiction?
I don't know why it eluded him, but it's the choice that you have in politics is not always clean. It's not clean cut. That's why you have a dilemma. It's the choices that you have is between bad and bad and good and good. You still have to make a choice. Sometimes when you make a choice in good faith that it would work, it might turn out to be disastrous. It could happen that way. Now, I'm not saying that the choice that Melles and the EPR representative Melles, when he was in charge, made was entirely wrong. But it had a contradiction because a federation, which is the political arrangement under the Ethiopian Constitution of 1995, a federation requires the decentralization and devolution of power. It requires the sending of more power to the regions. It requires balancing between the centripetal and centrifugal forces. Getting that right, getting that balance right is always difficult. It's always difficult that you keep the balance. You just keep playing the balance as you are walking the edge, on difficult edge. So it could elude any well-meaning person to strike that balance all the time. So, but federation by its design, or a federal arrangement in governance by design, requires that you devolve central power to the states. And the states constitutionally, the regional states constitutionally, had control over, for instance, over the administration of land and natural resources, among other things that the Constitution arrogates to the regional states. But what is relevant in this case to the developmental state is land and resources, including human resources. Those were basically powers arrogated to the regional states. But the developmental state, by its very definition, and experiments that succeeded, requires central planning, central decision-making. So that is where the contradiction is. The political project of federation, the political project of devolving political power to the states is an imperative, a requirement of the federal arrangement. But the developmental state, which was also required because the country to become democratic, and I still believe that, I remember someone had actually challenged me on the sequencing of democracy and developmental state, but I still believe, even based on the speeches and writings that Prime Minister Melles made, that he was sequencing. Because you cannot sustain a democracy exercised within the framework of federation in a country that is in abject poverty. Because people who are in a country that, where the economy, most of the economic activity is basically controlled by the state, where the private sector is small and insignificant, people are employed by the government directly, or they benefit from government contracts and everything. So economic activity, 75% is really dominated by the state, which is what the developmental state also considers as important because of central planning. So people who are elected in a democracy, in a free and fair and competitive elections, once they get to power, they're not going to leave power because there is no space for them in the private sector. So they cling to power. They become rent seekers, perpetual rent seekers. And you cannot build a successful democracy on an officialdom that is rent seeking. So you have to sequence this. That sequencing does not mean that you don't do anything democratic. Elections will always be conducted to develop the culture of democracy and democratic exercise of power. But you place emphasis, more emphasis. Maybe it's a matter of emphasis on sequencing, because the goal is still to become democratic. The goal is that. But the way there, the means that you get there is that you should build an economy that could sustain a middle-income country that will have a stake in preserving a democratic dispensation. But that was the balance that they missed, the mistake that they missed because of the contradiction between the imperatives of the political project of federal state, federal arrangement, and the economic imperative of becoming a middle income country through the developmental state. Because Ethiopia had two advantages at that time when Meles was coming. That is land and labor. That is the comparative advantage that Ethiopia had. So if land was continued to be administered, of course, it's owned by the Ethiopian people, but still administered by the states, central planning will not be possible. That is when the federal government started to get into the federation using the party structure, by the way. The party structure is that the party structure was nominally ethnic-based, nominally decentralized, but they have what they call democratic centralism, in which they make a decision like GPT, the growth and transformation plan for the whole country, So to administer the economic developmental state, central planning that is required, they had to cut back on some of the powers of the region. So that is where the contradiction and the tension created that actually culminated in the 2018 revolution. That's what I was referring to with the contradiction.
Well, you say that the central planning was always going to run counter to federalism, because federalism, by definition, required that everything was devolved, economic and political powers. But there are, and by that you seem to be implying that the contradiction was inherently integrated into the system, and it was always going to happen regardless of who was in charge, whether it was Meles or Hailemariam Desalegn. The timing could have been different, and some of the problem could have been delayed with more competent people in charge, but it was always going to sort of flare up at some point. That seems to be the point that you're making. But there are, and I have read about this a lot. There are people who say that actually the system wasn't the problem per se; it was the personnel who were the problem, and that if we had different people with different competences, the system could just about have worked. Is that a point of view that, at least on some bright days, you might have some sympathy with?
There is no determinism or inevitability in what I was saying. What you just said does not deny the fact that the political project of federation or federal arrangement required decentralization of power. But the economic project of central planning or state capitalism required centralization of decision-making in terms of economic decisions. So the contradiction is there. It's inherent. It's inbuilt. What was needed was to manage it, to manage that. And as long as he was alive, Meles was able to manage this because he'd thought about both for a long time. He'd written about it. He has at least clarified it in his own mind. But once he died, the need to understand the processes, historical processes, the dynamism that is developing, to understand that the architect, when the linchpin on the two, the contradiction, passed, it was passed to Mr. Hailemariam Desalegn, but Mr. Hailemariam Desalegn did not have the authority that Meles had in terms of wielding power, and he did not have the intellectual depth, the intellectual prowess that Meles had. So he could manage it for 3-4 years. He could manage the same what he inherited from Meles, but because he did not have that intellectual depth and authority in the state, it started to fracture. That it is not an inevitable process that this was going to happen. You manage it and manage for a smoother transition. Would Meles succeed? Would he have succeeded in obviating or preventing the revolution that occurred? I can't say that because it's called counterfactual. Things that did not happen, I cannot say. But managing is what was required, whether that was in the person of Meles Zenawi or Hailemariam Desalegn or any other person. It requires managing by observing the dynamism built into that contradiction. But there is no sense of determinism or inevitability that this was going to happen. By the way, in 2018, the opportunity to correct the problems did exist. In 2018, the guy that they elected for prime minister turned out to be worse than Hailemariam Desalegn. So managing, democratizing Ethiopia, managing the economy was possible if you had the skills and the knowledge and the insight to that is necessary to understand where things are going. So it's a matter of personnel, yes, but it's also a question of structure because of the competing political and economic imperatives that were built. But there is no inevitability in what I was saying.
Well, that's a good segue, Ezekiel. You mentioned the dude who came to power in 2018. So in 2018, the contradiction sort of bubbles up. The whole thing falls apart. And part of the reason why Abiy Ahmed came to power was because of the Qeero movement, of the Oromo youth movement, and they had demands. And part of their demands were that there be a fair distribution of wealth, because an oligarchy had been created, and they had developed resentment towards that, and they were demanding a fair distribution of resources, partly among other demands. There were political demands and a lot of other things. And the consensus or the wisdom in 2018 among the political establishment, among the intellectual class, was that there was an understanding of the inherent problems, of the contradictions, and that the people who came to power, including Abiy Ahmed and the people who was surrounded by, would be able to solve these problems. That seemed to be the received wisdom in 2018. And of course, with all the benefit of hindsight now, we could see that wasn't the case. And if anything, things have got considerably much worse. The whole thing has derailed. And why has that happened?
Well, by the way, I have written on this issue, dangerous interregnum, explaining what I believe was the problem. Now I can see how revolutions could be derailed, and written about it as early as 2018, that this country is really taking an authoritarian path. In fact, writing in 2018, October 8, 2018, on the Standard, that this is really a semi-authoritarian state that is being built. I remember on TV, and I think it's an LTV as it's called at that time, I used the word this revolution had been reversed. تقلبسوال was the word that I used at the time. There are structural factors that are common in revolutions. That is, well, first, in transitology literature, the literature on the transitions from authoritarian systems to democracy, they say that it's always greater chance of success at democratization if people within the existing regime, within the incumbent regime, were willing to transform, to lead the cause, the cause of the popular uprising, if they accept that. If you look at 2018, just before the change of prime minister, the EPRDF, they met in, I guess, towards the end of 2017. The TPLF itself met for almost a month, and the EPRDF met for 17 days, and they decided that they wanted to change. That change must occur. They said, we have made a lot of mistakes. They have blamed themselves, taken responsibility for all the wrongs that were made. And the EPRDF had this declaration saying that this is the roadmap. They had a roadmap, for God's sakes. They had a roadmap that they put out at the end of that 17-day meeting in 2017, when they decided that there should be a change in personnel. If we had followed that roadmap, correcting for the demands that you just raised, the constitutional demands that the Oromo Kero raised and others actually raised, and I'm using this word advisedly, that they were constitutional demands. Meaning, let's make sure that the constitutional right of self-governance in the regions are met. Economic justice and cultural autonomy. These were constitutional. And the EPRDF program was to make sure that Ethiopia actually transitioned toward a democratic dispensation, or a political system where the voice of the people were heard, some kind of participation by the populace. But as soon as Haile Mariam Desalegn gave up power, or the day that the new prime minister was inaugurated, he started talking something different than what we expected. And I was on record. I remember that day right after the speech, and I say, this is not what I wanted to hear from this new prime minister. What he said is not what I expected. I thought that he would give us a roadmap on how we get to the end of the remaining 2 years that he is entrusted with to lead. How we get with a map to a free, fair, and competitive election. That's not what he talked about on that day. What he talked about was a bridge to the past, a bridge to the past, to Ethiopia's greatness in the past. That we were always Ethiopians. We will die Ethiopian, and our bodies disintegrate and become Ethiopia. This is not the rhetoric that I expected on that very day. I never expected someone from the dissident group, never expected someone from an Oromo or even Somali or even Tigray would come up and praise Menelik on that very same day. So we went wrong on that day, is what I'm trying to say, that the possibility of institutionally helping the country transition for democracy was there. It was there. But they had the wrong choice. The wrong choice, and they knew it. People from the government had told the OPDO that put forward this man, who they knew the substance of this man. They knew who he was, but they put him forth as a potential prime minister. But from the opposition, especially from the TPLF, they had said that bring somebody else. Ethiopia deserves better, Oromo people deserve better, Oromia deserves better. We all deserve better than this man. But the OPDO refused. They say, you're not going to tell us who we will choose, because they were blinded by their hope that they're going to bring down TPLF domination and they will accede to power. All they wanted at the time was to make sure that TPLF did not remain its dominant position, but they had no thinking about the post-TPLF dispensation. They got the wrong person in power and they made several mistakes. And this is a man who came of age and to the meaning of power in Addis Ababa. And he thinks that Ethiopia is a promised land. Ethiopia is actually a country that is made by the divine, and all of her problems emanate from not from its history, but from the 1960s generation, whom he at one time bemoaned that they refused to die and disappear, and took Ethiopia in a different direction, in a direction that could not be sustained. A dictatorship of any variant could not be sustained in Ethiopia. But he felt that he could make it happen, and that's where things went wrong. There were structural problems, but also it's the agency that actually brought us to the multidimensional crises that we have today.
Well, I think the central question here is, why was Abiy saying those things? Why is it that he seemed to be someone who had a degree of nostalgia, and that is, to put it mildly, for yesteryears? He seemed to portray himself as the incarnation of dead emperors. Why was that the case? Is that because he was preaching to the gallery? Because if that was the case, then the consequences would be different. Or was that the case that he simply didn't know? He found himself at the throne, on the throne, but he didn't quite know what it is that he was expected to do. Because if it is the latter, the implications are different. Why do I say that? Because he was surrounded by people. Again, I don't want to mention people here, but generally, when he came to power in 2018, and when he was saying those things, people were clamoring to support him, to cheer on him when he was saying those things. And that would seem to suggest that there is no understanding, there is no clarity among the political establishment of what it is that we should do. So that is one thing. Or is it the other thing?
I mean, that's a question about motives. Question of why did he do this? Why did he choose that? That takes
More
me
than why. Sorry to interrupt you, Ezekiel, but more than why he was, because I don't want to psychoanalyze him, but to me, he seems to be, megalomaniac, and I don't want to psychoanalyze. But he enjoyed a popular support, not just from the average, not just from the average, from the average Mergasa or Hagos or Kabede, but from the intellectual class, from the educated class. He enjoyed support. And I mean, it was obvious to me, for instance, in 2018, that the things that he was trying to do and the things he was saying were going to take us to where we are now. So it should have been obvious to a lot of people. But that didn't seem to be the case. Why was he enjoying support? Why did he, for instance, he enjoy support from the Oromo base, from the Amhara base, and even initially from the Tigray base? If, as he seemed to be saying, there was an understanding of the central contradiction of the EPRDF.
Okay, if it's not about him, it's about why people supported him, if that's what the question is.
Yeah, it's a bit confused, but yes, a bit of both.
Yeah, I mean, look, as regarding the person, again, I'm going to have to refer people to a piece that I wrote entitled Megalomaniac or Machiavellian. People could read it. As far as psychoanalysis, but it's important psychoanalysis is because people are what their psychological structure is. Yeah, I've written about that. But it's the question that you're asking, why did people support him? I think we have to look at the texture of that support at that time. Number one, the EPRDF was not a democratic power. It was still an authoritarian state in which human rights were violated, democratic rights were violated. People have had enough of the EPRDF. It was still an authoritarian state. It's not such a saint that it had now become to appear in contrast to its scion. It's a brainchild that emerged into Prosperity Party. This is not a new party. The Prosperity Party is the EPRDF for all intents and purposes in its composition, in its there is still OPDO in the PP. There is still this Somali party in there. They've not mixed. They've not merged. This is oil and water. We shouldn't forget about the EPRDF time. When the change came after years from the Oromo side, for instance, after 4 or 5 years of protest, there was a euphoria. I am not one of them, but there was euphoric support for him. Not because people knew who this man was. Nobody knew him. He came on the backs of Lamma Magarsa and the Oromara group. Who knew who this man was, even as a person, his tendencies? Nobody knew him. He just was part of the Team Lamma project, and the OPDO put him forth for their own reasons, a mistake, or what, I do not know, but they put him forth. The EPDM, the Amhara party at that time, Amhara Democratic Party, that's the name that they had, and the Oromo Democratic Party at that time, they colluded to put forth someone because they just wanted to bring down TPLF dominance, not thinking about what would come next, what is capable of doing. Without thinking about that, they're focused singularly on changing the TPLF dominance. That's all they cared about. And the people saw in this man possibilities, that he became the symbol of the hope, the symbol of the aspiration that people had. Even at the time, it was clear to me, and it's on record, that this is not a support for him. What you see there, the outpouring of what seemed to be support, was not for the man whose essence we did not know, who did not have a program, and who did not have a roadmap. There was nothing that would have made anybody gravitate toward this man. But he happened to be there, and he personified the change, the possibilities of change that people aspired for. He became the symbol of change. He did some good things at the beginning, like imprisoning, allowing the political prisoners, releasing political prisoners, inviting dissident political parties inside the country. He took some bold steps, which actually led to a Nobel Prize winner. So the point that I'm trying to make was, it's not just the Oromo elite. In fact, the people that were the backbone of his support are from the Amhara elite. He took the roadmap. This is what they say, and that's what
even the Tigrayan elite, just to add.
Initially, yes, absolutely. And I was going to say, it's not even the Tigrayan elite and the Amhara and the Oromo. Everybody in Ethiopia, and even the Nobel Peace Prize Committee, were taken in by the charm. But for Ethiopians at the time, the euphoria of support, it's euphoric, by the way. It's not based on assessment of the man. People who knew him, his character, who knew him, opposed him. We did not know him because he was not a public figure. He was part of the Haile Mariam cabinet as Minister of Technology. We knew that much. Otherwise, we don't know. I personally, when I heard the first time speaking in Afan Oromo, I thought, did he learn Afan Oromo? Who's this man? Look, people knew his character, that he was a flawed character. They knew. They knew. But they overlooked, because for everybody, his cunning, his lying, his obsessive lying, they overlooked, because all they wanted was that in the regions, like for instance in Oromia, I remember in speaking to Lamma Magarsa at that time, what do you give up? You could have become the prime minister. There was nothing between you and the office of the prime minister. He said, we didn't think that the prime minister's office was important to us at the time. As long as the control from the center is loosened, we had program of reform and economic development and correcting mistakes within Oromia. I said I was interested in Oromia more than the federal power. I'm sure many others like Tigray also felt that way, that he could reform, he could carry out reform that the EPRDF itself was unable to reform. There was hope that he could carry out those reforms. The only people that thought that this is their man were the Amhara elite, not from the Amhara region, but ensconced in Addis Ababa. They were the ones that rallied to him with their money, with their knowledge, with their roadmap. And he felt like, because his goal was to become a king, and people think that this aspiration of becoming a monarch is a joke. Look at what he has done since then. Look at what he has done, whatever he is doing. What is he doing? Yesterday, what was he doing? You think that the Derg or the EPRDF did not know the importance of restoring Gondar, the Gondar palace?
Or the restoration is actually a bit comical. I mean, it seems to me that they just painted it over with white material, and that's pretty much what they have done.
Yeah, you can discuss what restoration means, but this is his priority. He says that I saw Gondar, and I did something good for Amhara, and that is the restoration of the palace. What else is good? His own palace. And Menelik's palace was disfigured. That's not restoration. Haile Selassie's palace was disfigured. That's not restoration. It's really a new palace. But that's what he's interested in. What else is he interested in? Vacation homes. That's what he's interested in. And he's using the resources of the country to achieve those goals. And what I was saying is that his childish or childhood or infantile desire to become a king is real. People did not know at the time. The euphoria, the public euphoria of support was not meant to support him for a man they did not know and for a policy that they were not clear about. It was the hope for change, and the man appeared at a moment where hope for democratization, for a better future, was at its peak. It's squandered it. I think I don't blame people for placing their hope in this man. It's at that time that they said he's a messiah, he's a whatever they were saying. It's a euphoria. It's not thinking. It's not an examination. It's not an assessment-based support. That's what I think is the genesis of that support for him.
Well, speaking of Abiy's attempts at restoration, there was a profiling, the profile of him done by, I think it was by the New York in 2025 now. I think it would have been in 2022. And there was a passage there where the writer said that Abiy seemed to have something bordering on obsession with the white. All the buildings and everything was being turned into white, and what he did in the for the palace in Gondar seemed to be a continuation of that obsession. Where that obsession comes from, I don't know. Whether it's something that is mandated by the prosperity gospel, or whether it's something that is inspired by American architecture. I don't quite know, but for sure he seemed to be obsessed with that. But that's a minor digression. Now, of course, you talk about the incompetence of Abiy Ahmed and how people should have known that in 2018, not now. I mean, now it's easy to say that with the benefit of hindsight, with millions of people, especially in Tigray, killed, with all the destruction that his regime has wrought on the country. It's easy to say that Abiy is not the right person for the position. I think what is less discussed, for my liking at least, is if Abiy was somehow, by some magic wand, for instance, replaced tomorrow by a sensible person, a person who surrounded himself with sensible people, what is the thing that that person would do? Now we hear about what the OLF say. They say that they would shape Ethiopia in their image if they were to hold power somehow. Fanom says the same thing. I think the TPLF, I mean, if he wasn't dead, would be saying those things. But I think generally, my question is, broadly speaking, if you could give us a broad outline of what is the thing that should be done, what is the missing puzzle in a way?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure the OLF is saying that we recast Ethiopia in our own image.
Maybe that was a misrepresentation, but I mean, they say that they have basic questions and that they would, if they were, I mean, they have demands, which is why they are fighting, right? So presumably,
demands
they
against
would have.
the Ethiopian state.
All right, yeah.
Ethiopian state. I don't think the OLF ever. OLF is accused not of capturing central power, but for centrifugal, that they're secession.
Secessionist tendencies, yes. Yeah.
Right. Fano, some of them have stopped it, but they were always saying the Fano cause has been the Ethiopian cause. Arat Kilo is our goal, and we created Ethiopia in the past, and we will recreate it again. That you can hear it. As far as I'm concerned, and I'm not a psychiatrist, that now look, that the Ethiopian leader, the Prosperity Party leader, is a pathological liar. It's not a matter of debate, is it? He speaks both sides of his mouth in the same sentence. So that's not an issue, that he is a pathological liar, that he can't help himself. He doesn't even know that he's lying, because that's what pathological liars are. That he is almost schizophrenic when it comes to power, that eliminating his opponents without really verifying, if he feels someone is against him, he's not going to try to bring him closer to observe. He thinks the person represents a threat to him, so eliminating without even any foundation is a problem. And I think that is a problem of schizophrenia. Is also what you see, what I was just saying is also a reflection of a narcissistic politician. It's a troubled man. And that piece that I wrote about this could be helpful, megalomaniac or Machiavellian. People could read it.
Yeah, I will put a link.
A troubled man.
I will put a link to it in the description box for our listeners to read it.
Right. So he's a troubled man. The reason that I bring this up is that you're saying that, is it possible to reform and bring back the Ethiopian politics to the center, or an area where people could actually see themselves and their ideas represented? Not under a troubled man. Not under a troubled man. No psychiatrist, but I can see people on the public stage, and what I've seen in the last 6 years have always fulfilled my suspicion initially. This is not the kind of person that could carry out reform. It's not. The problem right now is that if he continues on this path, Ethiopians are going to lose time and space to reclaim their own country. He's going to destroy it. And he had said it, for God's sakes. He has said it so on many occasions that if he is not in charge, he will destroy Ethiopia. He had said that on several occasions. This is the man who thinks that he is Ethiopia's salvation. Listen, why do you think that he's trying to divide the Tigran, the TPLF and Tigran ruling elite into two camps? Because this is a message to the Tigran people saying that I am not your enemy. The problem is that your own elite, your own governing class cannot agree. And I am the arbiter between the two. I'm the savior between the two. This is to Tigray. This is for the Tigray population. The message is, I'm the only man you can trust. Even after carrying out genocide against the Tigrayan people, he still expects that he could divide the Tigrayan elite and he could present himself as the salvation of Tigray. But this he had been doing on a larger scale in Ethiopia, always saying, for instance, look at the Amhara Fano. What are they going to bring to the center? Look at the Oromo Shane. What are they going to bring? They can't govern. What is the message of that? What is the message? They're saying that the Amhara dissidents and insurgents are incapable. The Oromo dissidents are incapable. The idea is, I am the only savior. I am your Messiah. I am your Mahdi. That's basically what he's saying. This is what he has been doing, and he is even retailing it in the regions right now. I don't have to go to what he's doing in the Amhara region or the Oromo region, but listen to some of his rhetoric when he says that when I'm implementing some projects, development projects in Gondar, the people that opposes what I'm doing in Gondar are not from Oromia, they're from Gojam. So I am the only person that thinks about the Amhara region in an affirmative and positive terms. This is how he presents himself. If he no longer is unable to do that he presents himself as the arbiter of conflicts and the savior of Ethiopia. Everybody else is an iconoclast. If he thinks that this has come to an end, he wants to destroy the country. He doesn't want the idea of post-Abiy Ethiopia. So, not under him, this is my personal view, not under this man. Ethiopians, if they want their country, if they really want their country, and here I want to speak to the people who work for him, in the party, in the regional states, in the military. You continue along this path, you're going to destroy your own fate. You've been plutocrats. You've been stealing. You've been corrupt. You have become millionaires and billionaires. That's what you've been doing for the 6 years. But if you continue along the path of supporting this megalomaniac, you will not be able to use that money that you have accumulated illegally. You will not, because the polity cannot succeed. The polity cannot. It's already fragmented. It's already divided. And this man, if he continues, he will destroy it. What Ethiopia needs is those who are inside, think about it. Think about it, because when the end comes, when he sees that his tactics have come to a dead end, he will hop on an airplane and he will go to Abu Dhabi and live there with his adopted mother. That's what he's going to do. You're going to be left. Those people that are in there are going to be left on your own. Think of the last 3 changes in government. Those who were sitting in judgment have now been judged by others. Whatever you saw, it will come to haunt you. It will come back. No crime is going to be left unpunished. The chickens, they will come home to roost. Just wait and see. So take care of what is the situation. And the rest of us, the dissidents, if Ethiopia were to continue, if that's our desire, and that should be our desire to save the states, the Ethiopian state, then we have to come together as dissidents and fashion, not wait for the Ethiopian dialogue to come up with a solution. It can't. That's a dead end. We have to have our own national dialogue outside the country. That should not be tomorrow. That should not be the day after tomorrow. It has to be today.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, one or two questions, Scale, and I won't detain you any longer. The first, you mentioned a lot of times actually the centripetal and centrifugal forces in Ethiopia that are pulling the country in different directions. And for our listeners, by centripetal, you mean the forces that want more sort of centralization, more unity, and centrifugal, of course, are forces that tend towards the secessionist direction. And one question that a lot of people ask, and this is a debate that a lot of people, especially in Tigray, in the aftermath of the war, the secessionist tendency has been sort of considerably increased. But one debate is that these are differences that can't really be reconciled, and that the only solution is for the Tigray people, for instance, to go their own way for independence, and that is how we could create a healthy and a more productive neighborhood in the region. But of course, there are people who say that we could actually reconcile the differences, but these are the two extremes. But surely the solution should be somewhere in between. If you could, I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you could give us a broad outline of how these demands could, again, ostensibly irreconcilable demands, could be reconciled. What is the middle ground in a way?
I guess to the Ethiopian problem in 1991, federation was a solution. It's a solution that worked. Contrary to the opponents of federal system, who are usually unitarist and centralized power, the federation, the Ethiopian federation, was a federation that worked. That worked, in spite of the suppression of democratic rights and human rights. In spite of those, it's a federation that worked, because since 1991 there was no people on people conflict. It was a time of relative peace. You could have traveled in the country without any problem of being kidnapped or killed. There was stability. There was internal stability. There was just one war with Eritrea, where Ethiopia had to defend itself and its territory at the time. Other than that, it was a time of relative peace and stability during the federation. The federation did not cause the current war. What caused the current war is not the federation, as many say. It is actually the reversal of the federation that led to the civil war in the country. The Tigray war is to defend Tigrayan self-rule. The conflict in Oromia, where the conflict actually started, to be sure, is to ensure self-determination, self-rule in Oromia. The war, the Abiy wars, the civil war that is raging still, it originated not because these regions were self-governing. They have some problems that would have been resolved politically. The war originated because people were determined to sustain their self-rule. I know the sentiment in Tigray. I understand the sentiment in Tigray. Tigray has always been the bulwark of preserving the Ethiopian state from outsiders and internally. I remember during the EPRDF, it is politicians from Tigray that were referred to as secessionists because they were Ethiopianists at the time. After being so fervently for Ethiopia's unity and territorial integrity and sovereignty, after going to war against Eritrea to do just that, the payback for Tigrayan people in the military, in politics, the payback had been genocide. For standing up for Ethiopia, rightly or wrongly, for standing up for Ethiopia. The feeling in Tigray is that we stood our ground for Ethiopia against outsiders, relentlessly. but this is the payback. And if you're a Tigrayan, I can feel the sentiment. I can understand the sentiment. I can empathize that sentiment for independence, not secession, independence. If the war in the Wayane war, meaning the first Wayane or the second Wayane, meaning the TPLF-led resistance against the Derg. If Tigray paid about 60 to 100,000 souls to achieve self-rule, paying 1 million souls for that safe self-rule doesn't make Tigrayans back down, pack up, and be quiet. It will make them more desirous of independence, not just self-rule. I understand fully the sentiment there. It's independence, not secession. The same thing in Oromia. In Oromia, the OLF, the champion of Oromo nationalism, they were the ones that actually participated in the writing of the constitution, and in particular, Lane Cholata, who was part of the group that wrote the transitional government, insisted on the inclusion of Article 39 as a compromise. I don't think Oromo nationalism has gone back on that. That the war that started in Walaga and now
But just to interject, Scale, there are now sort of flirtations in Addis Ababa that we should do away with Article 39. It's a discussion that you see people, it's sort of getting momentum. So just to add that.
Yeah, look, for me, Addis Ababa is not Ethiopia, and whatever is congregated in Addis Ababa is either regime-sponsored or the old guard sponsored. I'm talking about the feeling of the people. So what people say in Addis Ababa should not be really taken seriously because they dominate the media landscape. I don't think that the sentiment is to get rid of Article 39. That's what where I was going, by the way. After this war, I don't personally think that even the federation, the multinational federation that was designed by the current Ethiopian constitution is enough to address the issue of the power of the center. It's not enough. Maybe we have to come up with something else, and that's when I say we need our own dialogue. What do we need? Personally, if you ask me, after genocide and after 6 years of war crimes and war crimes against humanity, of using weapons as all kinds of things as a weapon, I don't think that the power of the center, I don't think the military, which Ethiopia is going to have to need in the future, the military, the federal military, what's it called, the ENDF, should have the same power it had until now. I think it should be emasculated of all of those of parts constitutionally by amending the constitution. This is my personal view. So the federation cannot accommodate, even the multinational federation. Forget about talking about doing away with Article 39. That's not the sentiment in Tigray. That's not the sentiment in Oromia. That's not the sentiment in Somali region. It's not. Addis Ababa is its own island, my brother. Addis Ababa has some weird ideas that is unconnected to the sentiment in the other regions. I'm talking sentiment. I don't think even the Fano that are fighting in Amhara region, who used to be the champions of Ethiopianism, they're talking about Amhara rights. That's what the sentiment even in Amhara. So whatever they say in Addis Ababa, I don't listen to it because it's always concocted by the powers that be or those are related to it. It's completely dissociated, completely unattached to the sentiments in those regions. So as far as I'm concerned, it's not even enough. The desire in Tigray, expressed by the political parties is real. The desire in other places about the power of the central government, where the central government could invoke constitutional right and say the regions could not deal with it. So I will go and kill decimate, and I could do anything, declare a command post and do whatever I can, dismantle the civil order. That cannot continue if Ethiopia were to continue together. So how Ethiopia's governance would be designed in the future is a matter of serious debate. And that's what I meant, is that we need to get together and see what could the governance in Ethiopia is going to look like if seriously Ethiopia were to remain as a polity.
Well, what you say about Addis Ababa reminds me of a book I read by I forgot his name, but he was a British correspondent in the 1930s during the coronation of Haile Selassie. He was sent by the British government to report on proceedings in Addis Ababa, and he went around and spoke to people to sort of get the sentiment about the coronation. And it turned out that the information they gave him was false. I mean, he found out using his own way. And that made him to conclude that Addis Ababa has this blinding effect on people. And they said that if a person had lived long enough in Addis Ababa to feel that life was normal, it was time to leave the city, because that meant that they have been warped in their thinking, and that it wasn't good for them. And it strikes me as interesting that that continues to be the case, because even now, when foreign correspondents do reporting about Ethiopia, they speak to people in Addis Ababa, and the picture they paint is always at least misleading. So the Addis Ababa has always had that effect on people. I wonder why that is. But finally, Scared, I'm going to put you on the spot again. George Orwell, in one of his essays, said that if you don't understand where a person is coming from, if you don't have an understanding of the personal journey of a person, you can't quite work out their politics. So I'm going to try to get something personal about you. If you could tell us a little bit about your journey vis-a-vis Ethiopia, maybe your upbringing a little bit. What I mean, you speak about Ethiopian politics, with passion, and you speak and write in English, in Amharic, in Tigrinya, and in Afan Oromo, as I was telling you before we started recording. That in itself is impressive, that you should be able to do that in four languages and talk about complex subjects with such articulation. I think it's something that you might take for granted, but for the observer, it's something incredible. But tell us a little bit about yourself, why you are who you are in relation to Ethiopia, and we will end with that.
Well, I mean, I grew up in Ethiopia, in that country. So I would always remain connected. I of course carry a passport that belongs from another country, but that doesn't make me less of an Ethiopian. It's a country that I grew up. It's a country where I was born, but I grew up in Nakamte, in Walaga, and that the ethos, the cultural ethos in there shape who I am. But I was also born in a Protestant family. I grew up learning the value of human beings, the value of humanity, the value of independence, because the variant of Protestantism, Lutheranism, that came to the region where I grew up is about emancipation, about independence, about having only the divine Lord as a Lord. That's the values that were inculcated in me. You can't be somebody else than what made you, the building blocks, the elements and that build your substance. So for me, I've gone to school and had some experience to try to learn human nature. I'm a social scientist, for whom what prompts human beings to act is a fundamental question in the social science. And I have looked at that from philosophical, economic, and political standpoints, and made up my mind about what matters to me. But I come from an Oromo ethos that says namni namuma, which means human being is a human being wherever you come from. That's what I was told. and it's what shapes who I am. And my Protestant, Lutheran or evangelical upbringing also tells me to value human beings for who they are, because the handiwork of the divine. It's not like I am a religious person that drives me, but a sense of morality. I remember telling a friend of mine in the Horn of Africa, he was telling me to moderate my views on something, and I said, "Look, you are a transactionalist. I am a moralist. For you, it's give and take. For me, it's right and wrong. This is how I tried to live. This is how my father wants me to live. He's not living right now, but I try to live out for him. Try to live out his vision for me. So that's what drives me."
Well, more power to you. Thank you, Ezekiel. One of the sad aspects of Ethiopian politics is that you get to speak with interesting people like you, and instead of talking about your education, your research, your personal journey, which would be far more interesting than politics. The Ethiopian politics is sort of a black hole. It attracts everything into it. We can't talk about anything else, and I consider that to be a huge waste of opportunities in itself. The fact that we can't discuss other more important issues, but I hope you'll be generous enough to come another time to talk about those things. But for today, thank you very much, Ezekiel.
Anytime. Thank you so much for having me.
It was my pleasure.